years ago this week, one of the top hits in the USA was How Can I Fall by a band who couldn't get on the charts in their native England until their music was discovered in the United States. I'll have details and that top hit after this.
American Top 40.
These are the hits ranked by Billboard magazine. Here's another of our 6 debut songs this week. It's by a 4-man English band called Breathe. They recorded their first album back in 85 and 86, and it hit the British chart. Now that same album, called All That Jazz, has been released here in the USA. And here's the first single from it, debuting at number 34. It's called Hands to Heaven by Breathe.
American Top 40.
Once a week with AT40, and you know how your favorite songs are doing across the USA. Now we're up to the band whose singer once tried becoming a door-to-door salesman, but he quit because he just couldn't bring himself to sing songs about vacuum cleaners. He's 23-year-old David Glasper of the English group Breathe. David told us that while trying to make it in music, he took all sorts of odd jobs, a few of them on factory assembly lines. So when the opportunity came up to sell vacuums, he figured, why not? At least he'd be out on his own all day. David told us, I got the job, and the guy said, when you turn up Monday, be prepared for something unexpected. And that's exactly what David got. He was escorted into a room set up like a church. There were rows of pews with a podium up front. David says, they told us we were going to be trained in American sales techniques. There was this mad-looking, large sort of guy on drums in the corner next to the podium. And there were all sorts of types in the audience, like ex-Army colonels and ex-RAF officers and strange offbeats. End of quote. Well, David says things just got weirder and weirder. They passed out what looked like hymn books, but they were actually filled with music to popular songs. Except the lyrics were changed. They were singing the praises of the vacuum cleaner they were going to be selling. Then the whole class of salespeople broke into a group sing-along. They warbled little ditties about how wonderful it was to sell this vacuum. Next, one by one, people stepped to the podium for testimonials. I managed to sell my vacuum to Mrs. X because I wouldn't let her close the door on me, and I got in there and she bought it and I made that money. Then the guy in the corner on drums would do a drum roll. David Glasper says, I finally just thought, what am I doing here? It was all too strange for him. David says he could have cleaned up selling vacuums, but he's not doing too badly these days making music. He's at number 8 with the rest of the band Breathe with Hands to Heaven.
American Top 40.
I'm Shadoe Stevens, and every week I take Billboard magazine, flip through it to the Hot 100 singles chart, rip out the top 40, and count them down. Here's a band of 4 Englishmen who stopped by the AT40 offices a few weeks ago and played a few games of darts with us. The men of Breathe all admitted to having some pretty dull jobs before their album All That Jazz launched 2 top 40 hits. Lead singer David Glasper sold vacuum cleaners door to door, but drummer Ian Spike Spice says he had the worst job of all. Spike said he was on the production line of a toy company and, quote, we were producing Cabbage Patch dolls and I was putting their little arms on. I did that for about 3 months. Well, Spike's days in the Cabbage Patch are all over as the band climbs a notch this week to number 11. Here's Breathe and How Can I Fall?
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. These are the hottest hits in the USA. Well, now we're up to the latest hit for Breathe, a high-tech band whose latest album was inspired by 2 weeks on a primitive Asian island without electricity or running water. Here's how it happened. About a year ago, the band was getting ready to start their latest album, Peace of Mind. To loosen himself up before heading into the studio, David Glasper, the leader of Breathe, decided to get a bit of peace of mind himself, so he went on vacation. David had always been fascinated with Asia, and he headed for what many consider to be the most interesting country in Southeast Asia, exotic Thailand. Now, David isn't the sort of traveler who just goes to grand hotels in big cities. He loves to stray off the beaten path, so he spent most of his time in the small villages in the south of Thailand. David says the highlight of his trip came when he met some fishermen who took him on a 50-mile trip in a small boat. They went to a tiny island with only 200 people, with no running water or electricity. David stayed there for 2 weeks, in conditions so basic, he says to wash, he'd just throw a bucket of water over his head. Every day, he'd walk down to the beach, sit on the sand, and just think. David told us, I realized we had all that we needed on that island. I learned that you have to really live life and not just collect possessions. As a result, David's whole outlook on life changed. And when he went back home, he wrote an album to reflect that change. An album about taking things in stride, about living a simpler life. An album about, as the title says, peace of mind. This week, the first hit from that album climbs 3 notches to number 17 on Casey's Top 40. Here's David Glasper and Breathe with Say a Prayer.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Mark Elliott in for Casey Kasem. And now we're up to the latest hit for Breathe, a band whose lead singer was well on his way to a brilliant career as an English teacher. That is, until he gave it up to pack vegetables and sell vacuum cleaners. You see, as a young man growing up in London, England, David Glasper had plans of becoming a teacher. He did well in school and was eventually admitted to England's prestigious University of Leeds. He intended to study English literature there with an eye toward eventually earning a post as a university professor. Now, David says he was all set to follow that path, except for a nagging doubt he couldn't shake. He says that along with English literature, he'd always loved music. While he really loved the idea of being a teacher, another part of him wanted to be a musician as well. The two halves of him battled long and hard. In the end, David decided he could always go back to literature, but rock and roll was something he had to try while he was young enough to withstand the pain of rejection. And so he started writing songs and practicing his music by night. During the day, to support himself, he took an assortment of what he calls, quote, terrible jobs. He packed vegetables at a supermarket. He packed computers into boxes for shipping. He worked as a groundskeeper, and he sold vacuum cleaners door to door. He says, quote, I knew I had to do music, and I did whatever I could to keep body and soul together. Well, it took a long time and a lot of strange jobs, but David Glasper finally made it. This week, instead of teaching English lit, he's teaching the art of the Top 40 hit.
Casey's Top 40.
Radio plays them, radio and records ranks them, and we count them down on Casey's Top 40.
Number 34.
Tumbling from 23 this week is a group whose members say their musical heroes include acts like Daryl Hall and John Oates, the Eagles, Al Green, Stevie Wonder, and Marvin Gaye. They're the British trio called Breathe.
American Top 40.
Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Spike. And I'm Marcus, and we're Breathe, and you're tuned to Shadoe on American Top 40.
Yes, and this week, Breathe debut with their 5th Top 40 hit. This time out, their singer gets a little extra billing. At number 38, it's Breathe featuring David Glasper. And does she love that man?
Coming up, as we roll into the second hour of our survey, the latest hit from Breathe, the trio that once decided they had to live together to make their music happen. 5 hits later, the only change they're making is to look for a bigger house.
Casey's Coast to Coast. Casey's Top 40.
Now, we're up to the latest hit for the English band called Breathe, the trio that decided they had to live together in order to make their music happen. 5 hits later, the only change they're making is to look for a bigger house. It all began back in the mid-'80s when the members of Breathe were having a terrible time getting their act together. The 3 musicians had a great working relationship. They knew their day was going to come. But their problem was that they lived in different parts of London. Now, London's a big, crowded city, and the guys spent so much time commuting to and from rehearsals and songwriting sessions that their creative energy was being drained away. And so lead singer David Glasper came up with the idea that the 3 should live in the same house. The idea had worked a generation earlier for the Jefferson Airplane and for the band called The Band. So the members of Breathe got themselves a funky old place on the East End of London. They set up housekeeping and got down to business. And wouldn't you know it? Once they were under the same roof, the creative juices started flowing. Out of that communal living situation came top 40 hits like Hands to Heaven, How Can I Fall, Don't Tell Me Lies, and Say a Prayer. Now that they're successful, some of the members have considered moving out to more luxurious quarters. But David Glasper says they've gotten superstitious about not sharing a house. They're almost convinced that if one of them moves out, the band will be history. So they've come up with a plan. They're looking for a new house, something a little less funky and a lot bigger in a well-to-do neighborhood in London. Their motto, the band that lives together gets hits together. And smashes like this one continue to prove that, in their case, they're right. This week, the three roommates in Breathe climbed 3 notches to number 30 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Does She Love That Man?
Number 40.
Falling from number 27 is lead singer David Glasper, along with guitarist Marcus Lillington and drummer Ian Spice. Together, they're the British band called Breathe, and this is their 5th Top 40 hit. It's a song David and Marcus wrote together, the sad tale of what happens in the aftermath of a love gone wrong. Here's Does She Love That Man?
America's Top Hits.
10 years ago this week, one of the top hits in the USA was by a band who couldn't get on the charts in their native England until their music was discovered in the United States. The group called Breathe had been trying for months to get their songs played by stations in London, but no one would pay any attention to them. Disc jockeys said their music wasn't different enough. Then their song called Hands to Heaven started climbing the charts in America. In fact, it went all the way to number 1 on the American Adult Contemporary charts. And it was soon after it hit the top in America that it started charting in England. American success made British disc jockeys at last take this threesome seriously. 10 years ago this week, their American success continued with one of the top hits in the USA. Here's Breathe with How Can I Fall?
Counting down the hits with Casey Kasem.